Hello, and welcome to Writers and Books Meet the BOA Author Series. I'm Sakshi Kumar, the Adult Programs Coordinator at Writers and Books. For those of you who are new to us, Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, a bookstore, and literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds. You can find more information at our website, wab.org. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're here. Feel free to submit questions through the chat or the Q&A function. Books are available through our bookstore, Ampersand Books. I'll put this link in the chat. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands in which we live and work. We are hosting this event from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Senko people, or the keeper of the Western Door. We're so happy to have Subhaga Crystal Bacon with us tonight. First, we'll hear her read, then she'll be in conversation with author and poet Peter Connors, publisher and executive director of BOA Editions. Epistolary in nature, these commemorative poems are gleaned sketches attempting to reconstruct lives and deaths from the typically scarce information made available on the internet. Seen through the lenses of whiteness and privilege from the last quarter of a lifetime, the poems navigate the desire to be at home in our bodies, to be loved and desired without danger, and most of all, to live free, healthy, and welcome in the world we inhabit. Subhaga Crystal Bacon's first poetry collection, Elegy with a Glass of Whiskey, was awarded the A. Poulin Jr. Poetry Prize by Stephen Dunn. Her work has appeared in a variety of publications in the United States and Canada, and she has presented essays on Elizabeth Bishop in Massachusetts, Nova Scotia, and Ouro Preto, Brazil. Welcome, Subhaga.
Thank you so much, Sakshi. I really appreciate you bringing in my old days as Elizabeth Bishop scholar. I'm really grateful to be here tonight, and thank you so much to Peter Connors for bringing me back into the BOA family and for making this book possible. I'm just so grateful. The list of folks to thank is very long and is mostly covered in the book's acknowledgments, with two notable exceptions, which is Catherine Bratt-Fotenauer and Justine Alfano, who've just been so great to work with at BOA. And of course, I want to thank again my beloved Sugandhi, who created the gorgeous cover, and Sandy Knight at Hoopskirt for the cover design. This was a difficult book to write, and it's a difficult book to read. According to the National Center for Transgender Equality, since last November, there have been 53 deaths of transgender people from violence and 33 by suicide, which to me is an indirect hate crime. If these poems move you, please do what you can to fight oppressive anti-trans laws and support the lives of transgender and gender non-conforming people. The book got its start in a workshop in the summer of 2020, led by my friend, the poet Cindy Williams Gutierrez, on writing poems of protest in forms. Tonight, I'm going to read a selection of poems from the book, including some of those in forms. Please be aware that the poems make reference to acts of violence leading to murder. There we go. When I first put the collection together, it was chronological, all of those who lost their lives to violence in 2020. And my very good friend, the brilliant poet Jennifer Martelli, who's listening tonight, asked me the question, why are you writing this book? And it was a great and important question, and it led to this first poem that I'm going to read. Why I'm writing about the murders of trans and gender non-conforming people in the year of COVID. Once I started, I couldn't stop. Every day I lifted the bandage to see the latest wound, infection spreading to rot. I was asked to write a poem about social justice, Black Lives Matter, gun violence. A queer person who survived to elderhood, I wrote about this intersection of fears, an epidemic beyond even the epidemic of the year. Suspended in time, sunlit window, feet on the red rug of my room, a new day, Googling trans murders. I was whole before and a whole after. So fast in July, Marilyn, Dior, Keisha, Aja, then the long break, 2-week vacation. I kept my vigil, even prayed daily, let it be over, please, no more. Then came Key, August 13th, and 2 weeks later, Leah, the end of the month, and Ellie Che, drowned off Jones Beach, maybe an accident, like Isabella after Labor Day, who fell or was pushed from a roof. No proof in either case of a crime. Fall brought the death of Ariane Burnett, shot in Independence, Mia by her boyfriend in Philadelphia, Micheline, the 6th to die in Puerto Rico, but not the last. By October, it was clear that the year would surpass the one before and the one before that. Brooke, the 32nd, 20 years old, the 21st Black trans person murdered so far. So far, we seem to come, celebrating National Coming Out Day that claimed Sarah in Indianapolis. 2 weeks later, Angel in Memphis. Every day I checked for news, hung in hope for an end of violence, of death. Every day I held my breath until I knew who'd been slain by stranger or lover as autumn uncovered the bony limbs of trees. November 4th, Schuyler Heath mourned as he. On the 17th, Unieski in Miami. Day of Trans Remembrance, November 20th, Che Misha chased down by a man with a gun, and Asia, who said she was going on a date. Even chronicling this, the daily plunge to heartache exhausts me. I wish I didn't have this need to record what came before, what follows here. One by one, each name, each life. Kimberly, the oldest at 55, Jaheim for her pantsuit, Courtney on Christmas, and Alexandria, the last of the year, Boxing Day. Year ends and year begins. On Epiphany, Tiana, then Samuel, Bianca, Dominique, 50 bands, Alexis, China, JJ and Jasmine, Jenna, Diamond, Rihanna, Jada, Dominique, Remy, Tiara, Natalia, Iris, Tiffany, Carrie, Jahira, Whispering Wind, Sophie, Donica, Serenity, Ollie, only 17, Thomas, Poe, EJ, Adalyn, Taya, Shay, Tierra Marie, Miss Coco, and Pooh. Names taken to reflect new lives. It's September 4th, 2021. That's the count to August 23rd. 35 trans lives taken in 8 months. 35, the average life expectancy. Midlife, all the sweetness denied to grow fat, get wise, find love, make home. I need to name this, the brutality of tallying the dead, horror in equal measure that they can and must be counted. Over halfway through a new year, new era, some might say, the list of names rolls out, rolls on. I'm here, not just counting, but incanting. And this next poem is the first poem in the chronology in which I actually included myself and a little bit about my story. And I think this is what prompted Jen to ask for the previous poem, why I was writing this book. Shockey Peters, 32, Amite City, Louisiana, July 1st. She was full of laughter and an abundance of life. Shockey, there's a plant that grows here where I live called shadbush. It's also known as serviceberry, but it's the genus I thought of yesterday, seeking shade on the hillside, carrying you with me in the heat of day. How it gives shade, gives fruit, dark purple, seeded and nourishing. Your face, Shockey, in the one photo I can find is round and open, dark and sweet. Your eyes seem to tip up a bit at the outer corners. Your lips are full, plush as pillows. I keep waiting for some story to explain your murder. I don't know how much that matters in the long run, but it might fill the gap around your death. I keep thinking about the name Amite City from the French for friendship. Like my hometown, Philadelphia, city of brotherly love, likewise, no friend to trans women. I spent a month in Louisiana in 1984. It was hot and humid, and I loved the way sweat soaked me, sticking clothes to skin. I used to move from shade to shade, the shadows of buildings, banana trees, and one very large fig tree in the yard of the house I rented, hand-shaped leaves the size of fans. In 1984, Shaki, you weren't even born yet. It was a heyday for being queer if you don't count AIDS. We were all trying on gender like a wig or dress or suit and tie. I used to go to a drag bar in Philly where I had a crush on a Zoftig redhead I now know to have been trans. She was very kind to me, taking my face in her soft hands, fragrant and styled like the mother of a childhood friend I had to share a bed with one weekend. I clung all night to the far edge in fear that I would accidentally touch her. There was a ripeness in her, sweet, nourishing, a kind of femme that makes my heart ache, that I've never known or been. There are many kinds of shade, Shaki, many kinds of shadow. I think of you now inhabiting that, luscious, lush, safe. And this one really struck particularly close to home. This is one of the first poems I wrote during the workshop in July of 2020 for Summer Taylor, 24, Seattle, Washington, July 4th. They were always the first one to call people out for being sexist, racist, standing up for queer and trans people. They were the one that was so vocal. Dancing the Cupid Shuffle, wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, protective gloves, a mask around their chin, Summer Taylor, activist, sibling, child, animal lover, killed by a car driven the wrong way up a closed ramp into the crowd. Summer, white, non-binary Seattleite, had all the privilege of race, love, family support, college, meaningful work, and strength of conviction fed on these nutrients. They stopped to dance on their way to City Hall at 5:30 in the morning, another night-long protest, the Black Femme March, festive, a celebration, the interstate closed, a space created for them to stand together. The day before, Diaz Love, injured in the crash, posted on Facebook, "The death threats from hate groups is real this weekend." Love, recovering in pain, the threats keep coming, writes, "If they thought this murder would make us back down, they are wrong." Summer, the last death in the first half of 2020, stands in stark relief for what they stood for. Black trans femme sisters, trans brothers, femme dykes and gay boys, white, black, brown, the rainbow of gender, no car can mow down. And this is the first of the formal poems in the book that I'm going to read tonight from the book, A Sestina, for Marilyn Cazares, 22, Brawley, California, July 16. She was strong, and she would look anybody in the eye and say, "I'm very proud of who I am." Marilyn, it's hard to keep up with the pace of hate this year. This summer, it seems to flower like a noxious weed, sending spores to couch themselves into what should be the beauty of your freedom to be yourself, brave, your proud Aunt Larissa's proud niece. It's rare for family to use the word niece for those who are transgender, as if they hate recognizing they're changed, they're brave children. Is it so hard to let them flower, to allow them to find their own beauty? All that imposed invisibility is couched in misgendering and dead naming. Your couch was set ablaze, Marilyn, Aunt Larissa's niece, by someone who had to kill your beauty to cover over his own self-hate. Did he see in you the seed and flower of a life he did not feel the bravery to love? To love what is, we must brave life or risk watching it go by from the couch, separated by walls and doors from the flowering. We must be willing to witness living. My own niece has also been hurt at the hands of one who hates her self-sufficiency, her fierce beauty. Our family nickname for her is Beauty Heart. It's a way of saying, let my love make you brave, protect you from the world's random acts of hate. Marilyn, I'm telling you this only as a way to couch the heartache of your aunt proclaiming you as niece. She told the world about your painful flowering from a boyhood of taunts and hurt. You were a flower amidst the heavy feet of those who fear unfamiliar beauty. One born a boy who grows up to be a niece. The transition is the thing that made you, Marilyn, brave. Your murder and the burning of your body on a couch did not extinguish your beauty with the flames of hate. Your people came to leave flowers for your bravery, Marilyn. Your beauty lives beyond the burnt couch. No one can kill your Aunt Larissa's niece with hate. Keisha D. Hardy, 24, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 27. I'm sorry. Keisha D. Hardy, 24, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, July 27th, a pantoum. I love the skin I'm in, and there's nothing you can say or do that's going to stop God's plan. Though she lived as a woman, police identified her as dead-named Hardy, saying Hardy's next of kin requested she be identified as male. Baton Rouge police do not believe Hardy was targeted because she was a trans woman. So she was misgendered as dead-named Hardy's next of kin requested, not recognizing the one known as Keisha, who lived as a woman. Hardy wasn't targeted because she was trans. Police say they've got no other motive for her shooting. Her killers must have recognized her as Keisha, who lived as a woman. Surely the way she was dressed, her hair and makeup. What possible motive could there be to explain her shooting on a rainy day in the street in the middle of the afternoon? Surely she was being herself, had her hair done and makeup, was on her way somewhere, possibly to the salon to work. A rainy day in the street in the middle of the afternoon when someone shot her and left her there alone to die. Keisha was on her way, ran her own salon, proud of her work, although on a Monday afternoon in July, she must have been free when someone shot her and left her there alone to die. We still don't know where she was going or why she died. On that last Monday afternoon in July, she was still free to dream her dreams, to simply be herself, Keisha, wherever it was she was going before she died, loving the skin she was in, still following God's plan. I was always struck by the statements of faith from a number of these trans women, particularly trans women of color, in the face of the role that Christianity is playing on circumscribing their lives. Key Sam, 24, Lafayette, Louisiana, August 13th, 2020, a guzzle. Key, Shaki, Keisha, Drea, Black trans women murdered in Louisiana, which has no law for hate crimes against gender. Shot on August 13th, why was her death lost to us? Why misfiled under her dead name, misgendered? Key, shot in a hotel and left to die by a 16-year-old boy. What did he know of who she was? Does he know his gender? 4 killed by gun violence in Louisiana in 4 months. Isn't it time for a trans hate crime law to be engendered? Subhaga mourns them all through poetry, her people, her sisters. She carries their deaths in her heart, queer gendered. Isabella Mia Lofton, Brooklyn, New York, September 7th, 2020, a belle absente. From a Brooklyn rooftop, Labor Day mostly over, maybe alcohol, maybe sex, maybe pushed, maybe fell to the pavement and broke her neck. What do we know about her but Chicago, New York, video dancing in wig and lace, long-nailed, plump-lipped, curvy, feminine, alive? We know this: one more died too soon. Someone wrote, "It's no crime if you trick him." I noticed the possible trickery of words and their cruelty. Another trans woman lost to what's unknown. I look for things to hold as truth, words, actions, faults found to close this story with. Sorrow has its own story: birth, childhood, youth that burns for taboo, for wild nights, hookups, and fright from night's razor-sharp brink. No one's said her age: young, under 35. The most a trans woman such as she can expect to be among the breathing, not a ghost. Months pass in this year of chaos, so much taken by force, 30 murdered, more wounded in body and twin spirit, burned, cut, shot, drowned, dosed. I write this for her, for them, to lift their lives from the snippet of news showing no proof of crime, to protect their freedom, to be unmolested, to live. Someone must honor their chosen selves. And just one more. Jaheim Bella Poog, 19, Pritchard, Alabama, December 18th. He said, "I just want to be me, Mama. I just want to be me," is what he said, and I support him. It seems to come down to the rainbow jumpsuit. She, dressed as a woman, Jaheim was Bella, was she, wore to a Christmas party, that and the wig. Bystanders videotaping her while she lay dead or dying in the street said, "He would still be alive if he wasn't wearing that dress." Not even a dress, just a woman's colorful one-piece pantsuit. Thank you.
Thank you, Subhaga, for sharing those. What just so powerful and so moving. I want to take a step back from the collection so that we can move into it and clear a little space for it. Maybe I also want to tell people that if you want to leave a question in the chat, I will keep peeking at that, and I'm happy to read your question aloud, and I know Subhaga will be happy to answer it. So I just want to let people know that. So when I was thinking about chatting tonight, I realized it's been 20 years since Elegy with a Glass of Whiskey came out. And I remember it really, really fondly because as we were chatting about it a couple of minutes before your reading started, that was the first book that I worked on at BOA. So it was always really special to me. And Stephen Dunn picked it. It was also only the second winner of our pool and prize contest, which is now in its 23rd season. So it really launched a whole bunch of things. And I'm really curious about the poetry that you worked on, particularly between that first book and this book, because I think that this book was a bit of a departure from what you had been doing in the second book. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is correct. Oh gosh, we were so young. It was such a long time ago, 2003. I mean, my friends and I often talk about how much the poetry world has changed, in that time. There wasn't Zoom, and there really wasn't social media to speak of. So if you published a book, then, you did your best along with help from the publisher to get it out into the world and so forth. And, I'm a slow worker. I was back then. So, it took me a long time to sort of get a second manuscript together. And then that didn't really get much traction. And I just sort of went in another direction and sort of, I got involved in spiritual work, which I spent much of the last 2 decades on. And then when I moved here to TWISP in 2014, I got involved with the Confluence Poets, which is a small writing group that meets twice a month, and we do readings. And my very good friend in that group, Greg Wright, I was getting ready to do some events. This was pre the pandemic, and I was signed up to do an event in Ellensburg, Washington called, Lit Crawl, I think, something along those lines. And where you go around, people, you're in one place and people circulate and come and hear you read. And Greg said, "Don't you think it's time for you to have another book?" It's been like, almost 20 years. So I put together Blue Hunger, which I self-published through Medhow Press with Greg's help. And I was writing poems then that were, largely nature poems. Stephen Dunn, who wrote a blurb for that book, it was one of the last things he did, because we lost him not long after that came out, following June, said, it's easy to think of Subhaga as a nature poet, but she's actually a poet of human nature. But I was writing about a lot of that sort of intersection between being a human, sensitive and aware, living in a particularly spacious place as I do now. I mean, after living in the Philadelphia suburbs for most of my life, which are, very crowded, and then moving out here to really the middle of nowhere, North Central Washington, 7 people per square mile. When I first moved here, all 7 of the people who lived in our square mile were related to me in some way, part of my family. And then, the murder of George Floyd was just a hugely catalytic experience for me. It really brought on, for a lot of us, certainly. And my good friend, Cindy Williams Gutierrez, who's in the writing group with me, called me up and said, "I'm going to offer this workshop on writing poems of social protest and form." And I'd never really written, political poetry before that, and maybe in a subtle way, about a little bit about the environment. But I wrote that the first poem was an acrostic for the word justice. And I was interested in trans murders because I was interested in the lives of trans people. And I wrote that poem and I just thought, oh my gosh, I've got to write a poem for each of these people, because I mentioned about 21 people in that poem. And then that just started the project that became this book, and this, really a deep exploration of myself as a gendered person, as a queer person, as a, non-binary, trans-identified person, really. And everything's changed, like finishing this book in a way has just set me off on a new course. Although the manuscript that I've been mostly working on looks at gender and sexuality and sexual expression from the personal perspective, but it's really informed by, writing Transitory, because it was really an eye-opening experience. When I first started writing this book, I was identifying myself as like a white, elder, queer, cisgender person. And my partner's like, "Are you really cisgender? I mean, is that really how you define?" I'm like, "Well, I don't really have body dysphoria or body dysmorphia or, whatever." And now I'm like, well, I think I really identify as non-binary and transmasculine. So like a lot has happened. And the poems are reflecting that, since writing Transitory, everything now is moving sort of in the direction from that point of view, you might say.
At what point did you realize you were not just writing individual poems, but that this would be a whole full-length collection?
It was really sort of a movement of being. I was talking to my partner, who, God bless her, them, I'll mention again, like lived with me through the writing of this book, which was really difficult. I mean, there were days I'd come out of my study and I'd be like, "Oh my God, I've worked all day trying to write a poem for this person." And, so it was like, I lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
Yeah, that's okay. No, at what point did you shift from writing individual poems to seeing this as a larger full-length collection?
Right. So as I was writing the poems, I sort of envisioned, well, if I'm going to write a poem for every one of these people, and I knew there was going to be a number, because that's what, history has shown us, is that every year there are, tens of murders, 40, 50. And I said to them one day in the kitchen, I really think this could be a book. But I was worried about, is it going to have like a short shelf life because it's from a particular year, or is anybody going to want to read this book? And, again, my writing group, the lugubrious sex pretzels from Warren Wilson, my Warren Wilson cohort, they just encouraged me, and they encouraged me to bring more of myself into the collection. And, that really, I think, fleshed it out and made it the book it is today, so that it was not so much just a catalog, which is what I had originally thought, But, there was a way in which they helped me to see that created an artificial distance between myself and the subject matter, because it had that long, unwieldy title at first, right? A catalog of gleaned sketches of transgender people murdered in 2020. And so I did sort of start seeing it as a book pretty early on, just because I was really committed to writing a poem for every person who was murdered in that year. And I have, continued writing poems for, recently been focusing on suicides of trans people, which, as I mentioned in my opening comments, to me is still a hate crime when you look at the environment that we're living in today.
I know that the story of Christine Jorgensen had a strong impact on you as a young person. And I think when I thought about that, and then I thought about talking to you tonight, I thought, there really is a much larger arc of this book if you go back to that. Could you talk some about Christine's story and also how that influenced you?
Yeah, it sort of predates that too. We have language now that we didn't have. I'm 68, so we didn't have when I was a small child, but I always knew that I was different. I didn't really identify as a girl. I had a kind of gender dysphoric childhood and adolescence. And, anyway, I was in high school, and I remember a friend of mine mentioning that there was this book, about this person who, of course, was in the news, and it was paperback, and it sort of made the rounds. We all read the story, and it was, there was something sort of sensationalistic about it, but there was also something in it that was extremely exciting. Like, oh, this is something that you could do. But in 1970-ish, when this, I guess, would have been in my consciousness, it was very taboo. And sort of, it was sort of at the same kind of elegant and taboo at the same time. It was Christine Jorgensen. And then, there were others that came after that were sort of in the news and sort of, looked at, but it sort of informed me in a way. Oh, this is a thing that people do, and there was something exciting about it that I kind of lit like a little fire in my heart. Not being a person who feels, the desire to transition my gender, but still to recognize that this is an option. And, and then, of course, there were so many stories that came after that. And we see that, trans historians show us that, transgender people have existed, forever. And, certainly in Berlin before World War II, there was a very vibrant trans and gender nonconforming community and, society and so forth. And so for me, Christine Jorgensen was kind of, I don't know, she was a forerunner. And, I'm trying to think, there was a book I read. I mean, I was a teenager and I was very naive. I worked in W.T. Grant, which was, five and dime. That was all over the place. And I worked in the book department. And when books didn't sell, they would tear the front cover off and stick them in the shopping cart for like 10 cents. And I read this one by about Reverend Troy Sperry, I think was his name. Who was a gay priest. And I misread the sentence in the introduction that said, my mother knew before I was born that I was going to be gay, and she said she loved me anyway. I remember saying that to my mother. My mother's like, that's just not possible, But there's a way in which it's like, well, if we acknowledge that possibility, then that starts us off in a better place to love our children as they are.
Yeah. And as often happens, time passes in between finalizing a manuscript and then when the book finally comes out. So I'm curious, in this case, what should we be aware of that has transpired since finalizing the book? And maybe also what has stayed the same?
Well, what's transpired is that the political environment has become extremely toxic and just unviable for trans people in so many ways. I mean, I just saw my very dear friend C.A. Conrad, who I'm reading with next week, posted that like the million moms are now complaining about, how the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade is not family friendly because there are trans people in it or drag queens in it. That's the way the environment has continued to get more and more toxic and more dangerous for trans people. I mean, in that one poem, Why I'm Writing, it was like into the Biden administration. I mentioned like, well, we might say it's a new era. And yet hatred for trans people, violence against trans people continues and does not really seem to shift. There's a wonderful website I've been introduced to through from the Seattle Trans and Non-Binary Choral Ensemble. I'm performing with them on Trans Day of Remembrance, called Remembering Our Dead, and it tracks all of the deaths of transgender people from Trans Day of Remembrance to Trans Day of Remembrance, and you can track by country and by manner of death, and it's like, it's such a devastating resource, but it's a useful resource. So I started looking at suicides, for instance. There were 10 when I started, and then 13 just in the US, and now there are 33 since Trans Day of Remembrance, and 55, I think, deaths by violence. So that's sort of, surprisingly, it doesn't get better. It hasn't gotten better, because even as, things open up, I guess it's the pendulum swing, as our culture has gotten a little bit more, well, a lot more gay friendly. The attitudes towards trans people and the violence towards trans people just continues to get worse. So that's problematic. For me, I sort of mentioned, a lot changed for me in the writing of the book. It really was a transforming experience for me to really lean into that question, like, well, why am I writing this book? And I my family's been very accepting of me. It was a long, arduous journey, of course, because it was the times that it was, and my mother was who she was, and so on and so forth. But she's gone now, and my sister and I, she's my only remaining relative, really, have gotten quite close. And so I go on vacation with them every year. And this year we went away, and on like the very last day, I gave her the galley of my book and said, like, oh, I thought you might want to look through this before we leave. She was like, well, I want to take it home with me and read it. Like, oh my God. So she did take it home and read it, and my niece read it, and they had this amazing healing conversation about my niece's childhood and some things that had happened to her. And they've just been so supportive. And, I'm getting ready to take over the Instagram feed tomorrow. And so I put a thing out to the family, like, send me some selfies of you with the book. And my one nephew's wife wrote me this beautiful little message about how moved she was by the book. These are people with whom I have not really spoken very much about my own identity. I'm just Aunt Crystal or sis, but the book spells it all out, and for me, this has been, where I've had to realize how much of myself I have hidden for such a long time. To be an old person and to still be sort of coming out to myself, to the world, to my family as the queer person I am, and what that looks like. That's been a huge change. And there's like no getting that genie back in the bottle at this point, so.
Yeah. I was also thinking a lot about your spiritual path, and I know that this has been a huge part of the past, at least couple of decades of your life. Trillium Awakening, correct? And so I was thinking about, I guess 2 questions off of Trillium Awakening is, does your path influence your poetry, and maybe this book specifically? And then as we've been talking, I've been thinking, you must need something to help you keep moving through this really, really intense material. And I kind of wonder then, does your spiritual path help you stay centered as you're working with this really intense and horrifying, really, material?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I could have written this book in the way that I did without my spiritual path and my spiritual community. Trillium is a kind of a tantric path, which means it's not even though it has lineage from the East, it's not really like a transcendent up and out sort of a path of awakening. It's really a down and in path of awakening. The original work from which it's an offshoot was called Waking Down in Mutuality, which was founded by a man named Samuel Bonder. And it's all about dropping in, that the path to awakening is really about dropping down into what we call sort of the core wound, which is this existential sense that many of us, if not most of us, have, that there's either something wrong with us or something wrong with the world, somehow we don't fit in or whatever. And that feeling into that, dropping into that, creates the pathway to really totally awakening in your true and total nature. So it's a lot of what we call sort of down work. And it's not for everybody, but for those people to whom it speaks, it's really useful to come to know yourself in that way without all the fixing strategies, that you've had, or dominated by your story, or, to just have that level of acceptance, allow. It's really basically comes down to just allowing what is. And so, yeah, I mean, there was a certain degree of capacity, I think, that I had, which is, the ability to be there with those people. I mean, it was quite an experience. I was limited to social media mostly. And, looking at these pictures of now deceased people, mostly people of color, young trans women of color, whose lives are very different from mine. I mean, Brayla Stone, there's one of the poems, a 17-year-old trans girl, really, let's say, young woman from Arkansas who was murdered. Somebody took out a contract to have her murdered, and her life was so different from mine, and so it was like, to really be able to drop in and see the non-separation, right, which is kind of central to most spiritual paths, right? Nothing is separate from anything else, right? Everything is the field of being manifesting as itself. Being is the incredible creatrix that's constantly creating itself over and over again in all these various ways. So it also helps to have compassion, even at the same time that I have anger. I recognize that the people who commit these crimes, and I try to point to that in some of the poems, are also wounded. They have been fed on homophobia. They can't tolerate their own sexual attraction to someone who turns out to be their same, biological sex assigned at birth, but presenting in a different way. I mean, a 17-year-old boy murdering a trans woman that he goes home with to have sex with, not knowing that she's a trans woman. So there is so much grief around all of that. And yeah, so Trillium has really, I mean, everything I do in my life, in a way, is because I'm living through this kind of porous but grounded being. I was telling my friends the other day, I sometimes feel like a baleen whale or something. It's like I'm going through life and I'm just taking in, and then metabolizing in however I metabolize, often, into poems of some sort or another. I mean, since I've retired, I remember Larry Levis, before he died, he was like, the poems are coming so fast, he wanted to get a sabbatical. It's like, they're coming so fast, I don't have time to write them all down. And for me, it's like, now that I'm retired, it's like, this is all I do, is really write poetry, revise poetry, edit poetry, and well, now do this, but.
Yeah. And I think, I'm thinking, for the phrase radical compassion popped into my head as you were talking. And I think that there isn't a sense in the book of, look at these horrible people doing this to these other people. It's like, there is this sense of like compassion, I guess, that comes through, and you realize it's all just, just horrible circumstance after horrible circumstance, for all involved. But I do think there's a sort of a radical compassion when you're looking at the people who are perpetrating the violence as well. Somebody just wrote in sacred witness. That's a nice term.
Yeah, that's a good phrase for it. Yeah. I mean, women murdered by their intimate partners. I mean, intimate partner violence is just such a common part of the culture, the society in which we live, but when you think about that, a person who has loved you, who also kills you, there's so much woundedness, that we have to start from that, really.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're going to be doing the Instagram takeover, so I want to let people know that's the Boa Editions Instagram takeover, and Subhaga will have it out all week, and you'll be posting different things. And so I'm hoping some of these will make their way into the post, but I wanted to ask you if there's some good resources for people who are looking to learn more about the transgender community and what's going on, books, documentaries, organizations, any place you want to point us to before we wrap up for the night.
Yes, I do. This wonderful source, I think I mentioned it in my notes, or in my, I'm just going to scooch across the room here and grab it. Well, I won't grab the book. It's actually a photo essay, a book of photo essays that's available also as a website called To Survive on This Shore. And it's a beautiful book of photographs and then one-page essays of transgender elders. And it's so moving. The poem that I'll end with, I Have Room for You in Me, references some of the people in that book. The Transgender Center for the National Center for Transgender Equity has the same initials as NCTE, the National Council of Teachers for English. I can always remember that. Is also a great site. Of course, Human Rights Campaign Fund is a really great, what do they call themselves now? I guess HRC, Human Rights Campaign. Also a great resource, and Remembering Our Dead, which is really based around Transgender Day of Remembrance, and they track deaths of transgender people from TDOR to TDOR, every year from November to November. It's a really great resource. Being active, writing letters, if you're politically inclined, to really take a stand against these laws that are just, really stoking the fire against, for hatred of trans people. The attacks on transgender youth are just unconscionable. We had this come up locally in our recent school board elections, where somebody was like, well, I'm a grandfather, and, I know we've got laws, but, it's not right to let a biological male be on a girls' sport team. And I was just like, the misinformation is just so deep. Like, a transitioning trans girl is not a biological male anymore, right? And there's no science at all to support that trans girls do better in their sports than girls who are assigned female at birth. There's just no science to back it up. So I think it's really important for people to, you don't have to look very far, to pay attention as these bills come out. If you live in a place where books are banned, or these kinds of laws are on the books, to really do your best to fight them, because they just make the situation worse. And, I said to my sister a couple of years ago out on the boat on vacation, like, when I was first working on the book, I was like, these people are just living their lives. They're not bothering anybody. They're not harming anybody. Just leave them alone, and sadly, that's just not our way in America. So.
Well, thank you so much for writing the book and for sharing it with us tonight. And I'm so happy that BOA could publish it and get this work out there. If you would share one final poem with us, we would appreciate it. And I'm going to sign off for the night. So thank you so much, Subhaga. It was great talking to you.
Peter, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to you for taking a chance on this very difficult book. It really means the world to me. Let's see. It's my little color-coded system here. I have room for you and me, a litany. For the handsome trans woman and cisgender wife, for the suit and tie and heels, for the skirt and corset and beard, I have room. No one can say a life is not right. I have room for you and me. For the one whose father loved her like a son until she became one, I have room for you and me. For those who claim their own names, break free from the limited born as cocoon, for the one with the wide-hipped sachet, big hands smoothing her dress, I have room for you in me. For him whose voice rings high, whose chest bears scars under hair and ink, I have room. For the one who wears their self-made clothes and hand-painted shoes, not trying to pass, I have room for you in me. For the pregnant man and woman father, I have room for you and me. For the sex worker's food and rent, for the elderly boy's sparse whiskers and soft eyes, for the statuesque matron, the broad-beamed man, for your lives and your loves and your rights, I have room. I have room for you in me. Thank you.
Thank you, Subhaga, for the wonderful reading, and thanks, Peter, for such an important conversation. Finally, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. If you're interested, I've linked Subhaga's new book in the chat. Yeah, thank you again. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks so much, Sakshi. Thanks, everyone, for coming.